The train had barely left the station when Nora grabbed a stranger's hand and whispered, "Please, don't pull away. You're my fiancé for the next 3 hours." She was rushing home because her mother was seriously ill. But 3 rows behind her sat the man who had ruined her reputation and still knew exactly how to make her feel helpless. The stranger looked at her trembling hand, then at the man watching from the aisle. And without asking a single question, he said, "Of course, sweetheart. I've been looking for you." Nora thought she had borrowed a fiancé for one train ride. She had no idea he was about to walk beside her into the hardest days of her life. Rain blurred the windows of the northbound night train, turning Chicago's lights into trembling gold streaks across the dark glass. Beyond the tracks, November lay cold and colorless beneath a low, heavy sky. Nora Bennett sat alone near the back of the carriage, holding her phone so tightly that the edges pressed pale marks into her fingers. The message on the screen had not changed in 40 minutes. "Mom's breathing got worse today. Please come home." At 31, Nora had learned that grief rarely arrived with thunder. Sometimes it came as a short sentence from a hospital nurse, sent while strangers argued over coffee and train doors side closed. She wore a charcoal wool coat over a faded blue sweater, the same sweater she had packed during a sleepless rush from her small Chicago apartment. Her chestnut brown hair was tied back carelessly, though loose strands kept falling across her tired face. Nora had always been the kind of woman who looked composed from a distance. She stood straight, spoke softly, and remembered birthdays. But beneath that careful exterior lived a constant fear of becoming a burden to anyone. Her mother, Margaret Bennett, had been the opposite. Margaret was warm, stubborn, and impossible to ignore, even after illness had thinned her silver hair and softened the sharp strength of her once commanding voice. Nora had not seen her mother in nearly 2 years. Not properly. She had called, sent flowers, paid for prescription deliveries whenever she could. But she had avoided Maple Creek, Iowa, the way some people avoid a burned house after the flames are gone. Maple Creek was small enough that everyone knew when someone lost a job, got engaged, drank too much, or came home alone for Christmas. It was also small enough for lies to grow roots. The worst lie had been about Nora. 2 years earlier, she had ended her relationship with Derek Hall, the man everyone assumed she would marry. He had been charming in public, attentive in front of her mother, and skilled at making people feel chosen. In private, Derek had been another person. He had cheated, denied it, apologized beautifully, then blamed Nora for the collapse of everything. Before she could find her footing, he had told their friends that she was unstable, unfaithful, and cruel. Nora had left Chicago for work soon afterward. She told herself she was escaping gossip. The truth was harder. She was escaping the possibility that someone might believe him. The train rocked gently beneath her, and Nora pressed her forehead against the cool window. She tried to picture her mother's kitchen, the yellow curtains, the chipped ceramic rooster beside the sink. Then the carriage door opened. A tall man stepped inside, shaking rain from a black umbrella. Nora saw him only in fragments at first: polished brown shoes, a navy coat, a familiar tilt of the head. Her stomach dropped before her mind could catch up. Derek Hall. He was 34 now, still broad-shouldered and carefully dressed, with dark blonde hair swept neatly away from his forehead. His jaw was clean-shaven, his smile practiced, and his blue eyes carried the unsettling confidence of a man accustomed to being forgiven. Derek looked down the aisle, greeting the conductor with easy warmth. That was his gift. He remembered names. He asked polite questions. He made decency look like a tailored coat. Then his eyes moved toward Nora. She turned away too late. Panic rose in her throat, hot and immediate. She imagined 3 hours trapped in the same carriage, listening to him speak gently while he reminded her that everyone back home still believed his version of the story. She looked around wildly. Most seats were full. An elderly couple slept near the front. A college student wore headphones beside the restroom. Across the aisle, a woman rocked a crying toddler against her shoulder. Then Nora saw him. A man sat alone 2 rows ahead, facing forward with a worn duffel bag beneath his boots. He looked about 35, with dark brown hair cut short at the sides and a rough shadow of beard along his angular jaw. His face was serious, but not hard. A faint scar crossed one eyebrow, and his large hands rested quietly around a paper cup of black coffee. He had the stillness of someone used to emergencies. Caleb Turner had spent the past decade working as a paramedic in Chicago. He had learned to move quickly when sirens screamed, to speak gently when relatives were falling apart, and to keep his own grief folded somewhere no one could see. Tonight, he was riding this train because it was the anniversary of his father's death. His father had worked this same rail line for 30 years, walking the aisles in a gray uniform and telling his son that every passenger deserved to arrive safely. Caleb had not noticed Nora until she dropped into the empty seat beside him. She moved so suddenly that he looked up at once. Her hand found his before either of them spoke. Her fingers were freezing. "Please," Nora whispered, her voice barely steady. "Don't pull away. You're my fiancé for the next 3 hours." Caleb stared at her. Nora's eyes shone with humiliation and fear, but there was something else beneath it, a woman who had been brave for too long and had reached the edge of what she could carry alone. Behind them, Derek began walking down the aisle. Caleb followed Nora's gaze and saw the man approaching with a smile that never reached his eyes. He looked back at her trembling hand. Then Caleb turned his palm upward and threaded his fingers through hers. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, loud enough for the aisle to hear. "I've been looking for you." Derek stopped beside their row. Nora held her breath. And beneath the dim train lights, between the rain-dark windows and the sound of wheels cutting through the night, a borrowed engagement began. Derek Hall paused beside their row with the smooth patience of a man who expected doors to open for him. Up close, his navy coat was spotless, his silver watch caught the carriage light, and his familiar cologne made Nora's stomach tighten. "Nora," he said warmly, as though he had not spent 2 years turning her name into a warning whispered over coffee in Maple Creek. "I didn't expect to see you on this train." Caleb felt Nora's hand stiffen inside his. Her fingers were small, cold, and locked around his, as if letting go might drop her into something bottomless. He did not squeeze harder. He simply stayed still. "I'm coming home," Nora said. Derek's eyes shifted to Caleb with polite curiosity. "And you are?" Caleb stood halfway, tall enough that Derek had to angle his chin up slightly. His broad shoulders filled the narrow space, but there was nothing aggressive in his posture. He had the calm, measured expression of a man who had learned that panic made every emergency worse. "Caleb Turner," he said, "Nora's fiancé." For 1 second, Derek's smile slipped. Then it returned, thinner and more careful. "Fiancé. Well, that's news." "It has been a busy year," Nora replied. Caleb noticed the change in her voice. It was still quiet, but no longer shaking. She had found a small piece of ground beneath her feet, and he understood that his job was simply not to move it. Derek leaned one hand against the seat in front of them. "You're headed to Maple Creek too?" "We are," Caleb said before Nora could answer. "Her mother needs her." The words landed softly, but Derek's expression altered. His gaze lowered, almost respectful. "Margaret is sick?" Nora looked toward the window. Outside, the rain dragged silver lines across the black night. "She's in the hospital." "I'm sorry," Derek said, and for a moment he sounded convincing enough that Caleb understood how people had trusted him. "Your mother was always kind to me." Nora's jaw tightened. Her mother had been kind to everyone. It had been one of her strengths and, sometimes, one of the reasons Nora feared giving her more pain. Derek straightened his coat. "I'll let you two catch up." "Congratulations, Nora." "Truly." Then he walked back down the aisle, greeting another passenger with the same easy charm. Nora watched him go until he disappeared into the next carriage. Only then did she let out a breath. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "That was awful. You don't owe me any more pretending." Caleb settled back into his seat. "He's still watching us through the reflection." Nora glanced at the dark glass and saw Derek's outline several rows away. "Of course he is." "Then we should make the story believable." A helpless laugh escaped her. It was quiet, but real. "You say that like you've done this before." "I have not," Caleb said, "but I have handled a few strange situations." Nora looked at him for the first time without fear blocking everything else. He was not handsome in the polished way Derek was. Caleb's face was more weathered, more honest, strong cheekbones, a tired shadow of beard, and a faint white scar above his left eyebrow. "What happened there?" she asked, nodding toward the scar. "Ambulance door," he said. "A very dramatic fight with a slippery parking lot." Despite herself, Nora smiled. They began building their false engagement carefully, like two people placing boards across a river. They had met through Caleb's work, she said. A minor ankle injury at a street festival. He had been the paramedic who insisted she stop pretending she could walk on it. That sounds like me, Caleb admitted. They had been together for 11 months. He proposed in early fall near Lake Michigan. They planned a small spring wedding, though neither of them had told many people because Nora's mother had been unwell. Do we have a dog? Nora asked. Caleb considered. A dog makes us look stable. A golden retriever? Too obvious. A rescue mutt? Perfect. One ear up, one ear down. Nora's smile faded slowly after that. She stared at the ringless hand resting in her lap. Derek cheated on me, she said. Caleb did not interrupt. It was during our second year together. I found messages first, then photographs. He cried when I confronted him. He said he was lonely because I worked too much. He said I had pushed him toward it. Her voice grew softer. I almost believed him. The train rattled through the dark. When I ended things, he told everyone I had cheated, Nora continued. He had already practiced the story. He knew which details would make people feel sorry for him. Why didn't you tell them the truth? Caleb asked. My mother had started getting sick. She was scared all the time. I couldn't bear the idea of turning her last peaceful months into a war between families. Nora swallowed. So I left. Everyone got to think I was the villain, and I let them. Caleb looked down at his coffee, now cold in his hand. That's a heavy thing to carry alone. So is being a paramedic, Nora said gently. He glanced at her. Caleb had not planned to speak about himself. His grief was usually packed away behind long shifts, clinical checklists, and black coffee. But Nora did not look at him as though she wanted a dramatic confession. She simply waited. My father died 3 years ago, he said. After that, I got good at being useful and terrible at being present. Nora stayed quiet. My marriage ended because my wife said I had disappeared, Caleb continued. She said I came home every night, but I was never really there. Nora's eyes softened, not with pity, but recognition. Maybe you were trying to survive the only way you knew how. No one had said it that way before. Caleb turned toward the rain-streaked window, feeling something old shift inside him. Across the aisle, Nora's shoulder brushed his as the train swayed. For 3 hours, they were supposed to be pretending. But somewhere between the lie they had invented and the pain they had confessed, neither of them felt quite so alone. The train slowed beneath a washed-out dawn, its brakes sighing through the quiet as Maple Creek appeared beyond the windows, small and gray beneath the rain. Nora stood with her suitcase beside the door, fingers curled around the handle, while Caleb remained a few steps behind her in the narrow aisle. Derek had already disappeared into another carriage, but Nora could still feel his presence like a shadow pressed against the back of her neck. When the doors opened, cold air swept across the platform. Nora stepped down first, her boots landing on wet concrete beneath the station lights. Caleb followed without thinking. He watched her stare toward the empty parking lot, as if she expected every person in town to be waiting there. You don't have to come farther, Nora said softly, turning toward him. Her tired eyes moved to the silver ring he had lent her. She slipped it from her finger and held it out. Thank you for helping me. I mean it. You gave me 3 hours without feeling alone. Caleb looked at the ring in her palm, but did not take it. The platform behind them was almost empty, except for a janitor pushing a mop bucket toward the station doors. Nora looked smaller than she had on the train. Not weak, Caleb thought, just exhausted from carrying too much without anyone noticing. You're going straight to the hospital? He asked. She nodded. My aunt said Mom had a difficult night. The doctors told her I should come as soon as possible. Caleb glanced at his duffel bag, then at the rain-dark road beyond the station. His rental car waited in the lot because he had planned to visit his father's old rail office. Instead, he heard himself say, I can drive you. Nora shook her head immediately. You've already done enough. Maybe, Caleb said, but I don't think you should walk into that hospital alone after what happened on the train. She searched his face, trying to understand why a stranger would stay. Caleb could see the question behind her silence. What do you want from me? Nothing, he wanted to say. Nothing except the chance to be useful in a way that felt human again. The hospital stood at the edge of Maple Creek, a low brick building surrounded by bare maple trees and a parking lot full of damp leaves. Nora sat quietly in the passenger seat, holding her phone in both hands. Caleb did not force conversation. He knew silence could be mercy. At the entrance, a nurse hurried toward them. She was a round-faced woman in her late 50s with cropped gray hair and kind brown eyes. "Miss Bennett?" she asked. "I'm Linda Morales. I've been with your mother through the night." Nora swallowed hard. "Is she awake?" Linda softened her voice. "On and off. She's asking for you. Her breathing is stable for now, but she's very tired." Nora's knees almost gave way. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her until she nodded once. Barely. Then he rested a steady hand near her elbow. Linda glanced at Caleb's ringless hand, then at Nora's anxious face. "Family can go in together," she said gently. Nora looked at Caleb. The lie hung between them again, fragile but necessary. "He's my fiancé," she said. The words came more easily this time. Margaret Bennett lay beneath a pale blue blanket in a quiet room near the end of the hall. She looked smaller than Nora remembered, her silver hair thin against the white pillow. But her face still carried something strong. Even illness had not erased the proud line of her cheekbones or the sharp, observant eyes she passed down to Nora. When Nora entered, Margaret opened her eyes. "There you are," she whispered. Nora crossed the room quickly and took her mother's hand. "I'm here, Mom. I'm sorry I took so long." Margaret's fingers trembled against hers. "You came home. That's what matters." Then her gaze moved toward Caleb, who stood quietly by the door with his shoulders lowered, careful not to claim space that was not his. "And who is this tall, serious-looking man?" Margaret asked, her voice faint but amused. Nora glanced back at him. "This is Caleb Turner. He came with me." Caleb approached slowly. "It's good to meet you, Mrs. Bennett." Margaret studied him with the directness of a woman who had spent her life reading people before they spoke. "You're the fiancé?" "Yes, ma'am," Caleb answered. She looked at Nora's hand, where the silver ring had returned. "He must be patient. My daughter takes her coffee black when she's worried and forgets to eat when she's sad." Nora blinked, embarrassed. "Mom." Caleb looked toward Nora, then back to Margaret. "I noticed the coffee part. I'll keep an eye on the rest." Margaret's mouth lifted into the smallest smile. "Good answer." Over the next 2 days, Caleb stayed longer than either of them expected. He brought Nora soup from a diner near the hospital and returned with crackers when she could not stomach anything else. He spoke with doctors when Nora's voice shook too much, asked clear questions, and wrote notes on the back of a folded train schedule. Nora watched him from the hallway one evening as he sat beside Margaret's bed, listening while her mother told him stories from Nora's childhood. He did not pretend to know answers he did not have. He simply listened, the way he had listened on the train. That night, Nora found him outside the vending machines, tired beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, his coffee untouched in his hand. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. Caleb looked up. "I know." "Then why are you?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I know what it looks like when someone is trying to be strong alone." Nora's eyes filled before she could stop them. "You barely know me." "Maybe," Caleb said, "but I know enough to stay." For the first time since receiving the message about her mother, Nora let herself lean against someone else's steadiness. And in the quiet corridor, with hospital lights humming above them, their borrowed engagement began to feel less like a lie and more like shelter. By the 4th evening, the rain had stopped, but Maple Creek still looked washed thin and tired beneath the early winter sky. Outside Margaret Bennett's hospital window, bare branches tapped softly against the glass whenever the wind passed through. Nora sat beside her mother's bed, turning a paper cup of cold coffee between both hands. She had barely slept in 3 nights. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose from its clip, and dark circles shadowed her hazel eyes. Caleb stood near the window, speaking quietly with Nurse Linda Morales about Margaret's medication schedule. He listened with the same steady focus he brought to emergencies, shoulders relaxed, jaw set, never making the room feel more frightened than it already was. Then the door opened. Derek Hall stepped inside, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. He looked polished as ever, his dark blonde hair carefully combed, his navy coat fitted neatly over broad shoulders. But his eyes had changed since the train. The smile he wore was still present, yet tighter now, as if he had spent too long practicing it in a mirror. "Nora," he said softly, "I heard your mother was ill." Nora stood immediately. "You shouldn't be here." Derek glanced toward Margaret, then back at Nora. "I came to pay my respects. She was always good to me." Margaret's eyes were half closed, but Nora could see she was awake enough to understand every word. That made the anger in Nora's chest burn hotter. Caleb stepped away from the window. "Mrs. Bennett needs rest." Derek's gaze settled on him. And you must be the fiancé. I am, Caleb replied. Derek gave a quiet laugh, almost friendly. Funny. Nora always hated being rushed into things. I suppose people change when they need an audience. The room went still. Nora felt the old instinct rise inside her, the instinct to explain, defend, apologize for existing. For years, Derek had used calm words like knives, always soft enough that others wondered whether she was imagining the cut. But Caleb did not move toward him. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked Derek in the eye. A decent man doesn't come into a sick woman's hospital room to make her daughter feel small, Caleb said. Not even if he wraps it in concern. Derek's face tightened. For the first time, Nora saw him without the old fog of fear around him. He was not larger than her. He was not more believable than her. He was just a man who had gotten used to people staying quiet. Linda appeared in the doorway a moment later, her expression firm despite the kindness in her eyes. Mr. Hall, visiting time is over. Derek placed the lilies on a side table. Of course. I only wanted to help. No, Nora said. Her voice was low, but it did not break. You wanted to be seen helping. There's a difference. Derek stared at her. Then he looked at Caleb, at Margaret, and finally at the doorway where Nurse Linda waited without blinking. He left without another word. That night, the hospital released Margaret for a short overnight visit at home, hoping the familiar setting would help her rest. Nora drove slowly through town while Caleb sat in the back seat beside Margaret, keeping a blanket tucked around her thin shoulders. The Bennett house stood at the end of a narrow street lined with maple trees. Its white paint had faded, the porch steps creaked, and one shutter hung slightly crooked. But the moment Nora opened the front door, the scent of cinnamon and old wood wrapped around her. Margaret smiled faintly. Home. Inside, the kitchen remained almost exactly as Nora remembered. Yellow curtains, a chipped ceramic rooster beside the sink, a stack of cookbooks leaning against the toaster. Caleb helped Margaret into the living room without making her feel fragile. He moved carefully, offering his arm but never insisting. That was something Nora noticed. He always gave people room to choose. Later, after Margaret had fallen asleep on the sofa, Nora stood in the kitchen staring at the worn wooden table. I forgot how much I hated coming back here, she admitted. Caleb leaned against the counter, his sleeves rolled to his forearms. Because of Derek? Because of who I became after Derek. Nora looked down. I spent so long acting as though I had done something unforgivable. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then Margaret's voice came softly from the living room. Nora. Nora hurried in and knelt beside her mother. Margaret's silver hair was loose around her face, and her skin looked almost transparent beneath the lamplight. But her eyes were clear. I don't need a perfect son-in-law, Margaret said. I don't need you to prove anything to anyone. Nora swallowed hard. I only need you to stop apologizing for protecting yourself, her mother continued. You left because you were hurt. You don't have to keep paying for that. Nora pressed her forehead gently against her mother's hand. When she returned to the kitchen, Caleb was still there. He had heard enough to understand, but he did not pretend he knew how to fix it. I don't want this to be pretend anymore, Nora said. Caleb's expression changed, softening beneath the tiredness in his face. I don't want to leave when this is over, he said. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Caleb added, but we don't have to turn fear into love overnight. We can just be honest. One day at a time. Nora nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. Outside, the old house settled around them with every small creak of its walls. And for the first time since returning to Maple Creek, Nora did not feel like she was standing alone inside her past. Spring came slowly to Maple Creek, as if the town itself was learning to breathe again. Snow melted from porch steps, pale grass returned beside the roads, and the old Bennett house began to smell of rain, wood polish, and soup simmering on the stove. Margaret Bennett did not heal all at once. Her recovery came in small, stubborn victories, sitting up without help, walking from the living room to the kitchen, laughing when Nora burned toast so badly the smoke alarm screamed like a tiny, furious bird. Caleb Turner stayed through all of it. He fixed the loose porch rail first, then the crooked shutter, then the back step that had complained under every foot since Nora was 16. He never announced these things. He simply found a hammer, rolled up his sleeves, and left the house a little safer than he found it. Nora watched him one afternoon from the kitchen window while he worked beneath the porch light. His dark hair was damp with sweat, his beard rough along his jaw, and his hands moved with quiet certainty. He looked nothing like a man acting out a role. Margaret noticed too. He loves like a carpenter, she said from her chair near the window, wrapped in a knitted gray shawl. Not loud, not fancy, but the roof stops leaking. Nora laughed, though tears pressed behind her eyes. You're impossible. I'm old, Margaret replied. That's different. I get to say things before people are ready to hear them. Word traveled through Maple Creek the way it always had. But this time the story changed shape. People saw Caleb driving Margaret to follow-up appointments. They saw Nora at the pharmacy, no longer walking with her head lowered. They saw the three of them eating breakfast at Miller's Diner on Sunday mornings. The diner was run by June Miller, a stout woman in her early 60s with short red hair, round glasses, and a laugh that could knock dust off the ceiling fans. June had known Nora since childhood, and for years she had believed the version of events Derek left behind. One morning, she placed pancakes in front of Nora and lingered beside the booth. I owe you an apology, honey, June said, her voice unusually soft. I should have asked you what happened instead of listening to everybody else. Nora looked down at her coffee. For a moment, the old hurt rose again. Then Caleb's knee touched hers under the table, not claiming, not rescuing, just reminding her she was not alone. Thank you, Nora said. That means more than you know. A few months later, the truth about Derek Hall came out without Nora lifting a finger. Her name was Evelyn Price, a quiet woman of 29 with sleek black hair, pale skin, and careful green eyes that seemed trained to avoid conflict. She had worked with Derek at a real estate office in Des Moines, and she finally admitted he had been seeing her while still engaged to Nora. Evelyn came to Maple Creek not to start a war, but because Derek had done to her what he had done before, lied, blamed, and walked away polished while she stood in the ashes. She met Nora outside the hospital after one of Margaret's appointments. Her hands trembled around a folder of old messages. I'm sorry, Evelyn said. I believed him too. Nora studied the woman before her and felt no triumph. Only sadness and a strange, clean relief. You're not the first person he made doubt herself, Nora said. But you can be the last one who stays silent. By evening, Maple Creek knew enough. People began doing the math backward. Old conversations were remembered differently. Derek's charm no longer looked golden. It looked practiced. Nora did not chase anyone for apologies. Some came. Some did not. Either way, she slept better. Caleb transferred to a paramedic station 40 minutes from Maple Creek. He kept a small apartment at first. Then somehow his boots stayed by Nora's back door. His coffee mug lived beside hers, and Margaret began saving him the last biscuit without asking. A year after the train ride, Caleb drove Nora back to the station at dusk. The platform lights glowed softly, and the rails stretched into the distance like silver threads leading into memory. Nora wore the same charcoal coat from that night. The ring he had once lent her still rested on her finger. Caleb stood before her with the nervous expression of a man who could face sirens, blood, and broken roads, but not the possibility of losing the woman who had brought him back to himself. I met you here because you needed someone to pretend, he said. But nothing about what I feel now is pretend. He opened a small velvet box. Inside was a simple new ring, bright beneath the station light. Nora Bennett, will you let me keep walking beside you? Without lies, without running, one honest day at a time? Nora looked at the tracks, then at Caleb, and thought of the frightened woman who had grabbed a stranger's hand on a train. That woman had only wanted to survive 3 hours. This one wanted a lifetime. Yes, she whispered, holding out her hand. And this time, I'm not pretending. Sometimes, God does not send a miracle with thunder, light, or a voice from the sky. Sometimes, he sends it as a stranger on a rainy train. Someone willing to hold your hand when your heart is too tired to keep pretending that everything is fine. Nora thought she needed Caleb to protect her from the past. But perhaps God knew they were both carrying wounds that could not heal alone. One needed courage to come home. The other needed a reason to feel alive again. In everyday life, we may not meet a stranger on a train, but we may meet someone at the right moment. A neighbor who checks on us, a friend who listens, a coworker who offers kindness, or a person who reminds us that our story is not over. Never underestimate a small act of love. A hand held at the right moment can become the beginning of a new life. If this story touched your heart, Please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us. Have you ever met someone at exactly the moment you needed them most? And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more stories of faith, love, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, heal your heart, and send the right people into your life when you need them most. Amen.